The best weapon in your arsenal is knowledge. Talk to authors who have done this, see what they've done, do your research, get a good insight into the benefits, the pros and cons of both from podcasts just like this one, and see what works and, ultimately decide what's best for you. Personally, I think your book, no matter if it's trad or indie, you want it to be the best book it can possibly be, regardless of how you go. So make that effort first before you decide where it goes. Just write a damn good book.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Pint and Portal Author Podcast. I am your host, Herman Sturnagel. Today, we're talking about hybrid publishing, how authors can combine the best of both traditional and self-publishing to further their author career. Joining me today is Jeremy Szal, an Australian science fiction author whose work has been both traditionally and independently published. His Common Saga series, including Stormblood and the upcoming Wolfskin, has reached readers around the world and has been translated into multiple languages, allowing him to pursue a meaningful and full-time author career. He brings a perspective as someone who's delved into both the traditional and indie publishing space. Jeremy brings the perspective of someone who has delved into both the traditional and indie publishing space. In this conversation, he shares his experiences with big publishers, his insights into the freedom and challenges of self-publishing, and his advice for authors who want to carve out a sustainable, hybrid career of their own. In today's chat, we break down the pros and cons of traditional versus self-publishing, how to tell whether your book is ready for one path or the other, and what mistakes writers often make when they publish too early. We also chat about how to build a sustainable career by blending both worlds. I had a great time with Jeremy, and I hope you do as well. As always, please help me and the channel out by liking and subscribing. It really does make a difference in helping me reach a wider audience and bring these tips to people like you who are looking to develop and sustain an author career. If you have gotten any value out of this or any of the other conversations I've had on the channel, then please share it with your author friends. Help them to gain some of the insight that you have for your author career, as well as to bring them into the Pint and Portal and join the conversation. Before we get into the conversation today, I do want to talk about today's sponsor. If you're an author who wants your book to be seen and not buried somewhere on the back pages of the Amazon search results, then Publisher Rocket is a tool that you absolutely need. Publisher Rocket is the ultimate tool for authors who want to optimize their Amazon listings, find profitable keywords, and analyze the best book categories to climb the charts faster. With Publisher Rocket, you can uncover what readers are actually searching for. You can have a look at what your competitors are doing, and even generate hundreds of high-converting ad keywords in just a few clicks. It's used by over 117,000 authors. That includes USA Today and New York Times bestsellers. Publisher Rocket helps you save hours of research so you can focus on writing instead of just guessing at what the market is doing. To learn more, you can check out the link in the description or head to pintandportal.com/deals and click on the Publisher Rocket link there. All right, well, welcome to the Pint and Portal Author Podcast. Jeremy Szal, how are we doing this evening?
We are doing pretty damn good. It is 10:30 p.m. in Sydney, Australia. I have a beer, and you have coffee, because I believe it is way too early for a beer for you over there.
It is way too early for a beer, depending, I guess, on the day, but since it's a weekday here, but it is 5:30 in the morning. We decided we were going to record on the same day if it killed us. So Jeremy's recording way too late and I'm recording way too early, but we made it work. We're both here on a Wednesday, and this is about the only time we could record and it'd still be the same day for us, as Jeremy is in Australia and I'm here in Western Canada. But I'm happy we made it work. This is fantastic. As I was saying to Jeremy, I'm usually up this early. I'm just not usually talking to anybody this early, but I've got my coffee, so I'm sure that the questions will come a little easier as we get into the conversation for me, but I am happy to have you here, Jeremy. Welcome to the Pint and Portal.
Thank you very much. Glad to be had.
You're welcome. And everyone always comes on the show saying that we should have a beer or a drink, because the Pint and Portal is the pub from my multiverse. That's where the name comes from. But normally I'm recording in the middle of the day, but luckily it's the evening for you, so you do get to enjoy a pint while while we're chatting. So this is
I
fantastic.
do. Well, the time should be reversed because as an Australian, literally any hour is beer o'clock. My Eastern European heritage, of course, would also attest to that. Yeah, any time is vodka o'clock. So the Python portal is open for business.
Excellent. Sounds great. So, Jeremy, we're going to talk about, I think, a few different topics today, but I think primarily what we're going to talk a little bit about is hybrid publishing. We're going to, of course, chat a little bit about a book that you've got coming out and the series that it's in. But to get us started, why don't you tell our listeners if they are here and they're wondering if hybrid publishing is an avenue that they should be looking at for their books. Maybe they're already traditionally published and they're looking to self-publish, or they're already self-published and they've maybe got a book that they're looking to query. What's something that you would say to that author that they might be interested in hearing today? Just I guess, a general overview of why hybrid publishing is or isn't a good model.
All right. So I think that the best thing to come out of self-publishing is hybrid publishing. For sure. I think that it is a market, it's a force multiplier, and that it allows you the flexibility to do what you want in certain areas and then have all these different revenue streams and can make both of them work. For you, and that's certainly been the case for me. I've got a trad series out with Galant's / Orion Publishing. I've also self-published a short story collection and a novella, and I'm planning on doing a hybrid series as well. Trad publishing doesn't always like that, but that's absolutely fine by me, to be completely honest. But I guess can get into that a little bit later. But I think it'd be good to maybe break down as well the benefit, pros and cons of both, because I think that that's only the real way to give an assessment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll dig deeper for sure. Just kind of just was looking for a general, overview about what listeners can expect today. But, let's take a step back because we want to hear a little bit more about you and your path to publishing. So can you, back up a little bit to when you first decided to get into writing or publishing? What did that look like for you, and what's your, origin story?
Sure. My origin story is both usual and not unusual. I didn't really grow up reading science fiction and fantasy in the way that most kids would, although I guess I sold my book when I was 23 years old, so I guess I was still growing up around the time. Basically I was in, always reading, but I never really thought of, books as fantasy or books as science fiction. It was only when I was graduating high school that I started gravitating towards certain video games or certain genres. I decided that, I really, really liked Star Wars. I mean, I knew that I liked Star Wars before then, and I liked the spaceships and everything, but I never really thought of them as science fiction. But then I'd be playing games like, Dead Space and Halo and Mass Effect and Skyrim and Fallout, and I'd be like, yeah, this is really my jam. This is really the sort of thing that I like. And then when I was in school, finishing high school, the first season of Game of Thrones came out, and I watched it when I was far too young, when I convinced my parents to get it for me. And then I convinced my mum to get me the books as well, and she had absolutely no idea what was in them. She found out after the fact, but it was too late. And then I got into those, started reading all those, and I was like, okay, this is what I really like. I like the epic, the different, the whimsical, the fantastical, the visceral, the otherworldly. This is absolutely my thing. And when I was in high school, finishing high school, starting university, on the summer, I wrote a fantasy novel, not a fantasy novel, a science fiction novel that was pretty awful. And I queried every single agent under the sun and got roundly rejected for it, as I deserved to be, because it was basically a rip-off of I don't even know what. Like, I was reading a lot of the Halo tie-in novels as well, so it was probably a lot of it stolen from there. Then I started getting more. I started deciding, okay, a novel is probably not the best pathway at the moment. I'm going to try my hand at short stories. So I did. I started writing short stories, and then I got quite a few of them published. And I think I sold my first short story pro publication to Nature magazine when I was 19. So I thought, that's really cool. That's a shot on the arm. And then I started working for a podcast called Starship Sofa. We were the first podcast to win Hugo Award. We would play fiction by different authors each week. And so I would be writing into people like, during my tenure there, I worked with people like George R. R. Martin and William Gibson and Hal Nelson. I'd go right into them and buy the rights to their stories. And I actually had to call up Mr. Uncle Hal Nelson on the phone to convince him to sell us the rights to one of his stories. And let me tell you, that
Right.
was it. That was a fun experience.
I bet. Yeah.
Scary as well. And so then, I was able to, kind of crystallize, okay, being slush as well as reading all these stories. And I was like, okay,
Yeah.
this is what makes a good story. This is what grabs me. This is what doesn't. This is what makes a really punches me in the gut with an ending. And this is an ending that just flops, right? This is what keeps me reading. This is what makes my interest wane. And so
Right.
I tried to take those skills on in my own writing.
Hmm.
And so when I think I just finished university, and then I took one more stab at writing a novel. It was a murder mystery in space. It got me an agent, but didn't get me anywhere. Then I wrote Stormblood, and then we sent that out. And Gillian Redfern at Gallant saw it, and she did reject it. And she's like, okay, look, there were a few problems with it, especially the opening chapter, but we see the potential in this. Would you be willing to go back and look at some edits that we've suggested, and would you be able to maybe resubmit it and we can take another look? And my response to that was, is the Pope a Catholic? Absolutely. Of course. What are you getting? Of course. I'm absolutely going to take a look at this.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I did. And I can tell you now, the edits that followed were done with surgical precision. It took me I think 6 weeks, 2 months to really hone those first 2 chapters,
Yeah.
and then really, really hone the next 100 pages that she edited. And she then, a few tense months followed. And then I woke up one morning on a Thursday and I saw an email that said, hey, we want to buy this and we want to buy the next 2 books. And so, yeah, basically that's how it
Yeah.
happened. It took the better
That's
part of a
amazing.
year from her, first asking for it, and then me doing the revision and everything. But it was a very tense year, very difficult year for other reasons as well. But it came out in the right way, and I'm eternally grateful to Gillian that she gave me that opportunity, because she edits. She's a deputy publisher of Gallant. She edits, Joe Abercrombie, Richard Morgan, Brandon Sanderson, Patrick Rothfuss, Alistair Reynolds, people like that. And so the fact that she actually took the time to give me those edits, and
Right.
I could have just chucked them in the bin and said, you know what, screw this. You don't know what you're talking about. My book's, every word's pristine. I didn't do that, of course, because I'd like to think I'm not a fool and I have some humility, but she didn't know me. But I could have done, but she took the time to do that for me, and I will forever be grateful for it.
Yeah, which is incredible, especially because you hear so many stories of, when people are shopping books around, that people aren't looking much past the first page, never mind the first chapter. So if her problems were with the initial chapters, that she, still read far enough to realize that this is still has potential. It just needs some tweaks at the beginning. I mean, that's great for you. And it's
Yeah.
also great. I mean, that was your second novel that you were shopping and it got picked up, which I don't know if that's the
Third.
norm. It was the
I mean,
third novel you were shopping.
it was
Yeah.
the third that I sent on submission. It was the third, like I said, the
Mm.
first terror novel I sent out to
Hmm.
agents, but
Yeah.
this is the second novel that went you're right, though it went to
Okay.
publishers.
Right. Okay. Yeah, but still, because you hear so many stories of authors who are shopping their, well, even, Brandon Sanderson, it wasn't his 12th book that he was shopping around that finally got picked up. So I
Yeah,
think,
yeah.
right, I think a lot of times writers are disheartened when the first book doesn't get picked up. But, it wasn't your first book. You still had, 3 books is a lot of books to write, to, continue to try and wonder if anything is going to happen with it. Did you decide, now, was there an option for you at the time? Like, was self-publishing even something to consider at that time, or are we still a bit early in the game at that point?
No, it was not at all something I considered. And I did have options to self-publish, and I had, options like, small presses came to me, just peripherally saying, hey, would you like to send us something? But I didn't want to do that because, and this is something that I knew from having published short stories and worked with other authors as well, that it is increasingly difficult. If you didn't have the backing of a publisher, it is incredibly difficult to gain a foothold. And it's especially if you are unwilling or unable to do your own heavy lifting. Because if you are independent, you are completely on your own, for lack of a better word, and you have to do all that heavy lifting by yourself. And I
Right.
was not confident that I would be able to do that, or even that I would be able to convince people that, I was any different from the, avalanche of other authors who were, self-publishing their stuff every day. And the fact is that there are thousands of books that are being published every day, but there are only a handful that are being trad published. And so I really wanted to make my debut. I wanted it to land with a splash. And so I stuck it out.
Right. So now, how long ago was it that your first novel was picked up?
2018. It was late
2018.
2018, and then it came out in middle of 2020 in the peak of the pandemic.
Fun. Yes.
Oh yeah.
So, so 2018, I mean, self-publishing at that point too was probably just getting to the point where people were considering it a viable option as well. Because I think there were people getting, self-publishing and doing well, but I think there was probably still a stigma around it that isn't as much there today.
Yeah.
When I first started when I was writing my first book, it was around 2019. I didn't even know, so it was a year or two later, I didn't realize that self-publishing was a viable option even, until I kind of got further into the process and started doing some research. At that point, had you seen it as an option that had you seen it as, was there the option there and you decided against it, or was it just that traditional publishing seemed like the only possibility at that point for you?
I mean, sure it was an option, but I just didn't want to take it. I didn't want to take it, and I just wasn't confident that I could do it.
Yeah.
But
no, and that's fair.
Yeah, I as well. Like, you're right about the stigma, and and there are reasons for that. Some are justified, some are not.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you said, you decide to start writing and publishing quite early. You had your first novel published, you said at 23.
Sold when I was 23.
Sold when you were 23.
25.
Right. Okay. So yeah. So you had your first novel sold when you were 23. At what point, you were saying you enjoyed Game of Thrones. You kind of had this background in story. At what point did you decide that writing a novel was what you wanted to do?
I mean, I've always wanted to do it. Even back when I was like 12 years old, like I was living in Europe and I was a kid, and so I didn't speak the language, and so a lot of my time was spent entertaining myself, and so I'd just be typing away my dad's laptop, just writing these little stories for myself. And it was always something that I enjoyed, but never really thought about doing it seriously. And then when I was in high school, and I thought, okay, this is something I really, really like to do. And I didn't realize just how fiendishly difficult it was going to be. No idea. I just assumed, I'll just type it out, send it out there, and it'll be done. It'll be out in 6 months. And oh boy, that's not how it works, son. Not at all. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's.
Well, I think I think there's probably some benefit to having maybe that blindness of how it works, because if you had known, maybe you perhaps would not have gone ahead and written that first book, because I think that's what had always held me back, was knowing how difficult it was. So knowing that I was going to put in this, huge amount of effort to even write the book, only to have it maybe sit on my computer somewhere. And I think that stops a lot of potential writers from getting the words on the page. But I think that obviously you had the tenacity to keep going even after you realized that first book that you had written was maybe not publication worthy.
I couldn't not do it. And I think for a lot of the time, that's what, what makes the quote unquote true writers, the ones that they can't not write, no matter what obstacles come their way, no matter what they're told, they just have to do it. It's just something, it's an impulse that, to not do it would be like not breathing. And so, that's why I kept doing it, how hard it was, how many setbacks I had. And believe me, I've had setbacks even after it was published. It doesn't stop being difficult. The difficulties just shift, believe me. But I've kept doing it, and I will continue to do that. And you'll prize this keyboard out of my dead cold hands. So
yeah, and for me too, like I said, it took me a while to get to that point, because I think it was more of a self-doubt issue. Like, I just didn't believe I could do it. But once I realized that it was something I was capable of doing, then I just haven't stopped since. So, but so to your point about though, you're like, I want to talk about that first book a little bit because I think it's going to tie in well to our discussion about self-publishing and tradpub. The first, and when I say your first book, I mean the one that you very first wrote, not your first published novel. Had you self-published that, had you realized that self-publishing was an option for you at that point, that book might have been put out into the world. Because before you started shopping it around, obviously you thought it was good enough to submit to an agent. So how do you think that that plays into potentially somebody's decision when they're looking at their options for publication?
I actually did forget to mention that during university, I also wrote a sci-fi novel that I queried
Cool.
to a lot of agents. I got a lot of interest for that, but I never got representation. So I guess there were two. There was like
Couple.
multiple
Yeah.
novels.
Right.
But
okay.
but the response to, I think your question, the answer to those is applicable for both books. I think if I put either of them out there, it would have damaged me substantially because they were just not good. They were kind of a mess. I really didn't know how to write. I was just like, yeah, I'm just going to sit down and just keep writing, keep typing, tell the story, and nothing. I refuse to look at them ever. I refuse to look at them because, I just feel like it's important thing sometimes to just get those words out of you. And if they're not published, then it's okay. You learn from the process and you go on to the next one. And I know it's really easy for someone sitting in my position to say that, but all of us had to start somewhere. And I think that if the one and only thing that you put, especially at my age at the time, where my brain was still growing, basically, I wasn't even an adult yet in some instances. If I would have just, shoved that out into the world, like I doubt that A, it would have sold, B, that would have been worth reading. And I think ultimately it would have tarnished the reputation I was able to have by putting out a debut novel with a big 5 publisher. So no, I don't necessarily think it's a good thing that someone is able to just, slap a few pages together and say, yep, that's going out there, presenting that as my best work. I don't think that's a good thing at all. And believe me, I've read enough stories in the slush pile to know that that is absolutely true. And so that your first work is often not your best.
Yeah, for sure. No, 100%. I agree with that. And, and hopefully it's not your best, right? If you plan to write multiple novels and build a career out of your writing, hopefully, I mean, you don't want your first novel to be your best one anyway, because you hope that you're going to grow, right? Even if you think it's a masterpiece, hopefully you can see that, oh, well, your next book is going to get better is the goal at least. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that your first novel that you write, it should be the worst one you write. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that it's there's only way you can only grow up. You can only get better. And even for Stormblood, I think it's the worst book that I've published in the sense that it's that every book that I've written has been a little bit better. I mean, I guess they vary they obviously, some I like more than others, but I think that the person who published Stormblood would not have been able to pull off the things that I pulled off in Wolfskin, for example. I just would not have had the confidence or skill or experience to do so. And that's again, that's part of growing as a writer, growing as a person. Again, I wrote the book when I was 21, so I think it'd be upset. Would not be a good thing if this was really the best I could do for peak then.
Right. Yeah. No, 100%. And I think, especially when you're younger, at least for myself, when I was 20, and when I look back to that, I don't think I didn't realize the perspective of that time would give me, how much different a story that I write now in my 40s would have been from 20 years ago that I wrote when I was 20. How much you do grow and change, and just as a person, not to say that a 20-year-old can't write a good book, but definitely looking back at what I would have written when I was 20, I would probably cringe quite a bit because, I'm just a different person now. And I hope that I know that I've grown from my first novel, which I did self-publish, and probably should not have, but, but that those are the just with some of the things to consider. But, so what advice would you give to someone listening who maybe has written their first book? It's a huge accomplishment. And I think that anyone who finishes a book should definitely celebrate that fact. But
Oh.
they're sitting on their first written book, and they're wondering, okay, should I self-publish this? Should I start querying it? They're looking at their options and considering how do they avoid making that mistake of putting up something that maybe is not as good as it could or should be.
Well, look, I think first of all, you'd want to do your research to find out the realities of both industries, and don't just, take it from someone that, self-published a book and, has sold 10 million copies out the gate and is now selling a course to show you exactly how you can do that, because trad publishing is dead and indie's the way to go. And don't believe that, mate. You're the product there, not the book. I can tell you now. But also don't believe them when they say, traditional publishing. It's totally easy. You just submit to a few agents and they'll take it. Then, hand you them, give you as much cash as you want. That does not work either. Yeah, I think it's very wise to look at both, but I would think that generally I would recommend people at least query agents, because then that will help them to get a metric of the quality. I have a friend of mine, Gareth Hanrahan, decided that he was he would finish a novel. He's like, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with it. Probably going to self-publish it. Send it to just a handful of agents. One of those agents, my agent, ended up giving him representation, and they sold it to Orbit as the first of a trilogy. And he just did the cover reveal for his third series. He's got, I think, 6 books out with Orbit now, and they've done pretty handsomely as well, and they've done pretty well. It was thought, okay, it's just something that I'm just going to throw out there. And that's, that's a pretty good indication. I was selling tens and tens of thousands of copies. And your publisher not only wanting to continue publishing you, but to continue giving you healthy amounts of money. That's a very good indication that, that you've done something right.
Right.
And so you don't know whether or not that could happen. And so it is, before just chucking up on Amazon, maybe just try and, once you've made it the best book that it can be, go to a few people and say, hey, what do you think of this? I think that's seriously worth considering, because I do believe this firmly that you are never the best judge of your own work. You're too close to it. And that this is true for me as much as it is for anyone else. You spent so much time poring over every single word. It is very hard to see the tree from the forest. And that's why I think it's important that someone has a beta readers or editors, regardless of what they're publishing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and to your point, I think too, get someone else who's in the industry, not, your mom or your friend to read it, because they're not going to give you unbiased advice either. I think, that works.
Who doesn't like you, get them to read your book.
Or at least, or who isn't as worried about hurting your feelings necessarily, or, providing constructive criticism, or even just knowing the industry. Because I think, even though your dad might be a sci-fi fan, he doesn't necessarily know, what is marketable necessarily, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
I also lost my train of thought. So now if I'm looking, let's say, at querying, what are some reasons why, other than having someone have a look at my manuscript who's not me, why would I query? Why would I decide to go the traditional publishing route instead of self-publishing? What are some of the benefits of traditional publishing, especially as a debut novelist?
Well, I think first, one of the great benefits is that you get to work with an editor. And as I've said before, my editor has been invaluable. She's helped to dissect and analyze and helped me gain insight for not only my book, but for the writing craft in general. That's been a huge benefit. And I've become a much better writer for that. And, I'm sure if I had to shell out the money for it, and I know that this would cost money because I also work as a freelance editor on the side. I know how much this would cost, to have someone who's always in my corner and is always and gets my work like no one else does. That is invaluable. And so she's been, a delight, and I've loved the fact that I've been given the chance to work with her, and I think that's a huge benefit. Everything's paid for. You don't actually have to pay for anything. So cover, copy editor, typesetting, printing, distribution, that's all taken care of. right? And, and also, of course, the fact that you have distribution like anything else before. Like I've gone to, like I live in Australia, right? I've gone to Sweden, Denmark, and I've seen my books randomly there in bookstores. And then I've gone to the counter and said, hey, I wrote these. And they're like, it's you. I'm like, they didn't know my face, but they knew they books, right? So they were familiar with them. And so they knew who I was from that. And, that's, that's incredible. I've gone down bookstores here in Tasmania, and I'm just at the edge of the world essentially, and they've been like, oh yeah, I was just selling your book the other day to someone. I didn't even know you're Australian. And I'm like, okay, I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not. But yeah, and I don't have to take care of that. That's all done for me. Right. I've gone my books are available in God knows how many countries, how many libraries around the world. Like I got a letter the other day from I think a 70-year-old retiree in Kentucky, like Lexington, Kentucky, who got my books from a library, and she told me about how much they was the best sci-fi book she's read since Hyperion. I'm not even on the level of Hyperion. I'm not really sure I believe that, because I don't even think the sequel Hyperion was as good as the first Hyperion book. So I doubt. I'm not entirely sure I'd buy that, but if someone thinks so, I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, right.
Well, like I've had, I think my work's been translated into like 16, 17 languages, my short fiction. And you get a huge amount of opportunities because you have that distribution, you have that reach. Like, for example, a couple of years ago, my Chinese publisher, Science Fiction World, they flew me out to Chengdu for Worldcon in China. And, that was like literally a free trip to China, all expenses paid.
Wow.
Like the whole trip cost me $100, and that was just alcohol in the hotel lobby. I would not have had that by myself. I was we were next to Tibet, right, in Chengdu, in Sichuan. And I got to meet incredible people and met fans, and met I literally was in the hotel lobby one time, and on the first day I got back, and I was just came back from the markets near one of the temples, and there were these two fans there, and they said to me, are you a writer? If I write, I'm like, yes. Are you Jeremy Szal? And I'm like, you know my name? They opened up a cover of magazine, and I think I have this magazine here. It's one of these. I forgot which one it was. These are the magazines that I've published in the world.
Wow.
And they flip it open, and they pointed to an illustration, one of the illustrations that they did, and they said, this one's mine. I'm your illustrator for the story. See if I can find it here. And I was like,
That's so cool.
That was an experience that I've never, like, it's not mine, it's an illustration, but it was like, these are the quality.
Yeah, but something along those lines. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Right. And so I would
That's
not
amazing.
have had a chance to have,
No, not at all.
yeah. And as well, another thing is, this is maybe not as applicable for people in the United States, because you don't have PRL, but in Australia we have PRL, which is public lending rights. So you get, basically means that you get money for your books being in libraries. And they now have just said, the government's changed the rules that they're going to allow money for ebooks and audiobooks. And I get the UK as well. So if, for example, my books are in 100 libraries one year, I get paid quite well for my books being in 100 libraries. If next year they're 110, I don't get paid for 10. I get paid for 110. And so every year, without fail, I get a very nice windfall of money coming into my account. And that is only going to grow as I publish more books.
Right. So is that not something open to self-published authors? Like, can self-published authors in Australia?
No. Of course you can. But if you'll be able to get your books into as many libraries as a book that's traditionally published is, it's dubious. And I know this because I have a self-published short story collection. I can tell you now, it's in nowhere near as many copy book libraries, and I didn't go to each of these libraries and say, hey, would you like to stock my traditional book? The publisher did. It was in the catalogs. They found about it that way. It just means better distribution, and no matter who you are, self-publishing a book just doesn't give you that range. And look, this might not be fair, but this is the reality, that I think that having a book traditionally published, it gets you taken seriously in the sense that it's a tick of approval to show, okay, you didn't just do it on your own. You didn't just put your book out there and have your friends and nice grandma read it. It went through an agent. It went through an editor, a committee of editors, a committee of publishers. It went through several rounds of edits and copy edits, and then it went to the book buyers and to the book trade and booksellers, and now it's finally out here in the world. So you have those those barriers to entry that someone has helped overcome.
Right.
So they know that it has to be some level of quality, or at least have some level of commercial aspect to it. They're like, okay, well, it's a tick of approval that you just don't get if you're independent. Is it justified? It doesn't matter if it's justified or not, because unfortunately, that's the reality of it.
Fair
That's
enough.
the way
Yeah.
people look. And I know this because, again, my self-published short story collection, I've gone to a few bookstores, and some of them have said, okay, we'll only take it because we know you've tried published other stuff, so we know it's not terrible. That was literally what I was told once. And other times someone has said, we're not going to take it because we know you've tried publish other stuff, but we as a rule just don't take independent things because it opens the floodgates, right? And that's with blurbs by people, Adrian Tchaikovsky and Garth Nix and Miles Cameron that are on the cover. And they just say, yeah, we just can't, we're not going to take it. Or, yeah, we just as a rule don't take indie books. And so it doesn't really matter whether or not it's justified or not. That's, unfortunately the perception that it has. I think the stigma is going down a little bit. But for the bureaucracy side of things, it is a little bit harder to go jump through all those jump that red tape. And I think that's all worth considering. And as well, obviously there are benefits. Did you want me to talk about what I feel like the benefits are or the disadvantages to trad? Benefits to
we'll absolutely get there. So and those I think are great benefits of TradPub. I don't think that if you self-publish that it's not saying that you can't get in any bookstores or that you can't get in libraries. It's just more you're the one doing the work to get them into those. I know I've had people send me pictures of my self-published book in some random bookstore in Northern England.
That's great.
It's just a surprise to me, and I'm like, I don't know how this bookstore heard about me, because they have to choose to order it. They're not getting sent, the bestsellers from a publishing house. So it's possible, but it's not as common, and it's not as, easy to get into some of those, especially the big box bookstores, right? And libraries as well. I know Canada, I don't know about the US, but I know Canada does have a similar program for the payment to have my books in libraries. I got lucky because I got a Publishers Weekly review, and that helped me to get into more libraries with Bartender Between Worlds. Definitely not as easy as if it would have been traditionally published and the publisher would have been distributing to the libraries, from my understanding. Otherwise, I'm reaching out to libraries one at a time, asking them if they want to stock my book, right? And which I have done on a local level, but I don't have the time to reach out to 200 libraries. I know authors who have, so it's something that is possible and might be worthwhile if that's an avenue if you really want to see your books in libraries and you're self-published, but it's not impossible. So let's I think it would be good though to talk about, because I know there's some downsides to traditional publishing, and it's not all that sort of thing. There's so much to consider, because that all sounds great in practice, but I know that's not everyone's experience in traditional publishing either. Just because you get traditionally published, that doesn't mean that everything's rosy for you. So can you talk a little bit about, I guess, some of the downsides of traditional publishing, and what people should consider if they're thinking that they're just gonna, if the publisher picks their book, then they're gonna be off to the races?
Yeah, I think it's very worth considering that you basically do have to do the vast majority of your own marketing and publicity. It really doesn't matter if you're independent or trad. You are going to have to do everything you can to push your book the way you think it should be pushed and the way that you think it should be gotten out there. And you would think that publishers have every incentive to really push those books, because they're the ones taking the lion's share of them, the money's worth. So they want to get those books out there and make that money back. Well, apparently not. Apparently they're allergic to money, from what I've seen and what other people have told me. Traditional publishing also takes forever and ever. Like glaciers honk at publishing to go faster. Publishing can move fast when it wants to. When a hot new book is doing the rounds and going to auction, they will move fast to do it, and they will move fast to get it out there. But at the same time, it just takes forever, and it is mentally exhausting. Even for my third book, I delivered it in February 2024. My editor didn't get back I had to do some major cutting on it, but I delivered that cut version in January 2025. Even then, and had to do my edits and submit that version. Even after that, it's still not coming out until March 2026, right?
Right.
So
It's
it's
over
been
a
a
year.
long time in the long time in the process, right? And that's not
Yeah.
abnormal, fortunately.
No.
Yeah. And I think that like publishing as well, it is a dinosaur. It likes to make decisions that are, let's just say, beyond human comprehension. Like I want to call them Kafkaesque. I will call them more Lovecraftian because trying to decipher them and trying to get logic out of them will drive you insane. It will bend your brain like a pretzel. And I think that as well, like this isn't about me per se, but it's things that I've
Yeah.
gleaned over the years because there is a spirit to core with writers and we talk. And I think that as well, one thing that is worth considering is that traditional publishing has there are things that they really like to go certain ways. And there are some people who are more vocal than others about it being that way. My editor is not one of them, thank goodness. But for example, Trad really likes it when an author stays in one genre. You write this one genre for however many years or decades you can, and that you don't really move. And that's a bit crazy to me because I'm a writer. I'm not a writer of whatever it is. I'm a writer of of this genre that you decide that I write in. I'm a writer of whatever I decide to be. I have to
Right.
follow my creative vision, my creative voice. And if I decide I don't want to write in this genre anymore, or if I've exhausted my creativity or my then I don't really think it's up to the committee to decide otherwise. And I think that's a little bit insane. You know, you know, they'll tell you, oh, you stick to this genre. This is the genre that you write in, but also this genre
Yeah.
isn't doing so well. I'm like, okay, where does that leave me? Where does it leave these writers? There's also one thing to consider as well. There's a thing in some contracts that's called non-compete clauses. It basically means that you can't switch genres or you can't sell. I mean, what it is basically saying is if you have a book that is published with a certain publisher, they don't want you to also then go and publish with their competitor a book in the same genre. But they will sometimes extend that to novellas or different genres or even self-publishing, which can lock a writer in. And that is, insane and unfair. And I would really want that removed from any future contracts. But I think the stress, it's a bit hard for me to talk about, but I think the stress and uncertainty of that put me in a pretty dark place for quite a long time. Thinking that, this is a genre that I want to stay in, that I'm in. It's not doing that well at the moment, but I still have to write in it and can't really switch. And if I do switch, it's a one-way door. Like because this information, it's very hard to find because a lot of it is
For
behind
sure.
closed doors, and because I'm in Australia, and so it's a lot harder to communicate to find like-minded writers with the experience who've done this. And so, yeah, it put me in a pretty dark place for quite a long time. And I've only really found a way to, at least it made it really hard to find joy in creation. And I've managed to claw my way out of it, but I think it's still really worth considering this. And, that publishing would be like, we want something similar, but also very different. We want this genre, but also something that straddles both genres. We want you to write this thing, but we've got no idea whether it will sell, if it'll work, or even if we'll buy it. We don't know because we don't know what the industry is going to be like in 2 years' time. I might sound angry and cynical, but I'm actually not. I just know that this is the reality of publishing, unfortunately. And these are not hard and fast rules that this is what a publisher will say to you, or this is what you will be told. Because my editor has not told me this at all. My editor is probably the reason that am still sane, B, that I'm, still in this industry because, she's been incredible and useful and insightful and has told me, and this is echoed by my own observations, that no one knows what will and won't work. Publishing likes to pretend that it does, but it actually doesn't. You can have a formula for something that should work, but it could just flop on its side. Whereas a book that can be a sleeper hit, publishing doesn't know, but they will like to hit. They can hedge the bets. They can certainly put a lot of marketing money behind a book, and that can take off. And that is very often what happens. But there are plenty of books that, and I'm an example because my first book did way better than they thought it would. They exceeded the target expectations.
Right.
Yeah, it is still important to keep all this in mind and still not let you lose your creativity and your spark because you can. Is
Right.
what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah, no, I think that is something interesting to consider. And I don't think I've considered it from that perspective where, if you decide to publish, let's say, an early work and, you don't not realizing that you are essentially locking yourself in potentially to writing that kind of story, that genre or subgenre, even for the indefinite or at least foreseeable future. That's definitely a consideration because I would definitely pause at that because my attention span is very short as
Yeah.
as can be seen in the breadth of the subgenres that I've written in so far.
Yeah. It
But I
doesn't.
think as
I'm
well.
sorry. Sorry, I didn't want
No,
to interrupt you. I just wanted to
you're good.
clarify that I don't know. Look, this is not telling you that a publisher will say this, and this is something that you will be told, and this you must do this. There are always, you can have a pseudonym, or you can, pivot or be with a different publisher, or you can self-publish, and that's the beauty of hybrid publishing. But these are things that will almost certainly come up depending on who the publisher is. And it's something just to be aware of and to, find ways to say, actually, no, I don't want to do this. And I'm going to say this pretty early on that this is not really what I'm doing. And I'm saying that to I'm telling my agents and people like that, no, I'm not sticking in one genre. I'm not going to be just trad. I'm going to be doing hybrid, and we will have to find a way to make it work. And if you have a good relationship with your editor or your publisher, I think it's plausible that you could find it.
Yeah, so you have, just because, I guess in that initial conversation around, what terms and rights that they have, you can have those sorts of conversations initially. You don't have to necessarily take whatever they say they're going to give you.
God, no. That's what a contract for. It's negotiation.
Yeah. And, I don't know from what I've heard, and I can definitely see, if you're a star-eyed writer who just wants to get your book out there, I can see the temptation to just sign whatever paper they put in front of you and give them whatever they, ask for, thinking that I guess this is just the way it is. But you do have some agency in, those contract negotiations as well. Correct?
Yeah.
Like that's where you're,
Yeah,
yeah,
you
yeah.
should. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it
Yeah.
depends. It depends on the leverage, and it depends on other things like that. Certainly, there are things. My agent got the change. It was originally a 2-book deal. And my agent got it to a 3, and raised the amount of the advance by I think 30%. So essentially
Nice.
doubled the amount of the overall advance. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
there are certainly
That's
things that can
fantastic.
be changed in the contracts
Yeah.
for sure.
Cool. And now, so I do want to touch a little bit before we move to, self-publishing a little bit, because you did say that your first book did far better than they had expected. And, for people who are potentially have already had, maybe they have a trad deal already, maybe they've just kind of signed their first deal, or maybe they're a couple of books into it. Was there anything that you think that you did to help that happen to, get your sales to a point where because I know you had said you'd done a lot of your own marketing, even though you're traditionally published. Was there anything that you specifically done that you can attribute to that book succeeding more than what they had hoped or what they had expected it to?
Well, I already had a slew of short story publications. And so I was known, like I wasn't just a new name on the block, like
Mm,
I was known. I'd worked as an editor for 6 years, and so my name was already out there. And and I already had a lot of writers that I knew, the other people that I'd worked with, and I had connections and people like that. And one thing I know for a fact is that the the one thing you can rely on, if maybe the only thing you can rely on in publishing, is your reputation,
mm,
is your relationship with other people. And so it is, I think, if you have friends, it's to make friends in publishing and make people that find a small group of cadres and comrades that you can rely on, people that you do think that can do things for you, but also that you can do things for. I think, and we've seen this before,
yeah.
people who rock up to someone else and they're like, hey, what can you do for me? How can we do, how can I gain something out of this relationship?
Yeah.
The fact that I was an editor for 6 years and I wasn't getting paid, and there were a lot of people that I published for the first time. Like there were, I think, about a dozen stories that I edited, went back and did what my editor did. I'm like, hey, the story isn't there yet, but could we maybe go through some edits and let it work? And one of those guys that I picked up one of his first published stories ever, he became the writer for Helldivers 2, the video
Wow.
game, like the lead
Wow.
writer. And
Yeah.
so, and we met in Seattle Worldcon, the other day, and I found out that he was the writer for that game there. And he was like, "Yeah, I know, Joe. You were the one who gave me one of my first publications ever."
It's
And so we
amazing.
had
Yeah.
that
That's so cool.
relationship, and so we were able to talk, and so we knew it wasn't just a matter of, "Oh, hey, what can you do for me?" It's because we knew each other, right? We knew each other and had those connections.
Right.
I'd spoken with people, and so there are people that you can talk to that way. Like I'm good mates with Richard Swan. I took him out for
Okay.
beers shortly before his book came out, and then he became a Sunday Times bestseller. And I told him it's really good that I took you. We had a friendship before that because you know that I'm not a grifter. You know, because your book could have flopped like hell, mate, and it would have
Right.
made a difference. It would have taken you out, but it didn't. And
That's
so
so
it's
cool.
stuff, right? Yeah, it's the
Yeah.
and so I was able to go to people, say, "Hey, could you blurb it? Could you talk about it? Could you post it? Could I sent it out. I knew a few reviewers that I'd spoken to, and I knew people who could send it out there. And I think that helps a lot. It's your reputation, and it's the person you are, and things like that. Like I had a lot of people who just bought it just because they knew me, right? Because they knew
Hmm.
because I'd worked with them at some point on the podcast, or I'd done something with them, or I was in a group with a bunch of other debuts, and they were just happy, for example, to order it in their library. Then I was happy to order in their books, and I've done it for countless other people. I think it's
Right.
always important to look at what you can give as much as what you can take.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think, that's great advice. And I really believe that self-publishing works the same way.
Yeah, of
And
course. It's
so,
just writers in general. Yeah.
yeah, it's really nice to hear that. And one of the coolest things about being a writer that I did not expect was the friendships that you build with other writers. And, not, from like you said, not what can you do for me perspective, but even just, kind of the shit, like no one else really understands the process and the back end of things, to have someone to commiserate with and to chat about the industry. And, that's one of the main reasons I do this podcast, is to chat with other authors and to connect with them as well. But having that base, I think, of other authors in your corner who you can help each other along with, will take an author a long way, regardless, I think, of if you're trad or indie. And I think that's something that maybe someone looking at traditional publishing doesn't realize, how much work is involved on your end of things still. And not necessarily that even seems like work, because you're just like doing what you love and being involved in an industry that you love to be involved in. But had you not spent that amount of time building those relationships, perhaps that book would not have exceeded the publisher's expectations, or maybe it still would have. But
Yeah.
I
We
think
actually wouldn't
to
know.
yeah.
Wouldn't know. I think as to go point as well, I think it's also the fact that it was traditionally published and wasn't just, I just wasn't, throwing it out there like, because my short story collection, I can tell you now, is not sold anywhere to near as much as my novel has. I can tell my trad
Hmm.
novel has, I can tell you now.
Right.
And I think that, the fact that, I was able to get that, to come out the door with a big five publication, I think added to it. And like, so it wasn't just clearly something that, or, I would actually had all these other venues, and it had all these other ways in which the book was accessible. And I wasn't just throwing it out there and saying, "Hey, anyone want to buy my stuff?" Obviously,
Right.
I'm not saying that that's what indie authors do at all. Of course not. But I think that it all to it. Oh yes. Well, yeah. Yeah. And but yeah. Again, I was an editor. I saw plenty of it, and and people talk. Believe me, people talk. Writers talk.
Hmm.
But I don't think I
Absolutely.
would
Yeah.
have had access to a lot of those facilities and those spaces if I wasn't traditionally published as
Okay.
well.
No.
But yeah, there are lots of varying factors.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. So now I guess let's talk a little bit about self-publishing, because you do have a self-published book, but you're also, thinking of self-publishing possibly some other works in the future. So what benefits does self-publishing have over traditional publishing?
Well, it's a lot faster, for one. It's way faster. You don't need to wait, donkey's years for, the editor, then the copy editor, then the cover, then, God only knows what else, like before it all comes together.
Hmm.
You can actually, go out there and like just get it done yourself. But on the flip side of that coin, it also means that a lot of that is relying on you. You're a one-man show a lot of the time.
Hmm.
And so you are on your own. It does mean that you have the freedom to do whatever you want. And I think that it also means that you you do, like, it is easy sometimes to feel like someone in a faceless, nebulous ghost from traditional publishing is hovering over your shoulder, looking at your work, saying, "What are you going to do next? How is this going to compare to your old works? Will this be accepted? Will this, will it sing off the first page?" And some of it is good and bad, because I think it can also push you to do your best work, because you really have to think, okay, this really has to grab someone's attention. So I can't just say, "Oh well, the book starts on chapter 10. The real story starts in chapter 10. We can I'll just send you I'll send you that much." No, you need to start. The story starts on chapter 1, mate. But at the same time, I think that some of that pressure can cripple you, and can really think, okay, it can make you overthink, and that can make the writing suffer. And I know it certainly has to some degrees on my end. And I think that with I'm writing this other series that I'm planning to just self-publish on the side. And a lot of the pressure that I feel from trad is gone, because I'm like, okay, this doesn't have to break the world. This is something I can write. And if it does well, it does well. If it doesn't, it doesn't. That's fine.
Right.
But with the trad book, I'm like, okay, no, I really want this to hit a mark. I want this to really, strike a nerve. I really want to knock it out of the field with this one, because I know I have to, because I know I'm in competition with a lot of other books that are vying for that space. This isn't to say you aren't also in the indie space. You're always in competition, but it's different, because this is at the acquisition stage. And so not just the reader stage. And, what can make a book take off can be random. But, when an editor is taking a book to acquisitions, they have to both love it and feel like they can sell it, right? It has to be both. You can't have you might be able to have one, which is that they think they can sell it, but and they don't love it completely. But yeah, we know that this almost will certainly be a bestseller, although how they predict that, I don't know. But you most certainly cannot have none of them. You need to have one of them. Or in best case possible scenarios, you have two, but you don't necessarily need that with self-publishing. You can just, well, if you have a good
because
marketing,
you're the one making that decision, right? At the end, yeah. So, and I think, I think to your point, not that you have to find, not that, I mean, obviously we want to write something that you feel is going to sell, but if you're submitting it, the audience is, you have to make sure that one decider is going to feel that way about your book, not the wider audience.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes a lot of people won't always know what they want until they see it. To be honest, I think that as well, that there is no actual floating face looking over your shoulder, but it can certainly feel that way. So you can put that pressure on yourself, but it is just a trade-off.
Right. What are are there any other benefits to self-publishing?
I think that ultimately, the benefits come from being a hybrid author, because you have those two streams.
Okay.
That, and I think that being able to then be in control of your work with self-publishing, but also have these bigger, quality notwithstanding, it's kind of like Star Wars. You have the big epic blockbuster movies that everyone goes to see. Then you have the smaller TV shows that not as many people see, but a lot more slower pace, perhaps a little more niche, catering to a more specific audience, whereas the blockbusters have to appeal to a wider audience. And, but you can, as the reader, you can enjoy the best of both. It depends on your taste. It depends on your style. It depends on what you want to do that day, what you feel like consuming that day. And so I think that's a huge benefit as well. And also with indie, you get a lot more money from selling your books. Sometimes libraries, I was in Japan once, and I think a library, I just checked and I saw that a library bought like 5 copies on Amazon, and I was like, holy wow, that's a good amount of money that I got for there just for a few books. If this was 5 trad books, it wouldn't nowhere near as much on the royalty statement. But also books, you want to be selling a lot more than 5. So you can make you bank back with a much smaller amount of sales. You can make some money back. Although of course how much you actually do make will depend very wildly, especially depending on how much money you've already spent. Fortunately, I haven't had to spend that much, and I've still been able to, again, my sales and my short story collection paid for a ticket to Japan, and those aren't cheap from Australia. So yeah, there certainly are benefits, and the fact is that you get
Hmm.
to control, you get to hand sell it, and you get feel like you're actually making a lot more money per book.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So so you're as a hybrid author, and you've got obviously, so you have options, as I guess what you're saying. How do you decide then what books you're going to query and what books you're going to self-publish? What does that decision-making process look like from your perspective?
I think for the self-publishing, the book I'm going to self-publish, it's in a very different voice and style and approach that my trad because I'm working on two projects now. One that I want to trad publish, one that I'm probably going to go indie with. The trad books are things that I'm pretty confident. Okay, like this has mass appeal. It works on both emotional and commercial level. I feel like it's really strong, but it's also a lot harder to write and there's a lot more pressure. The books that I'm self-publishing, I'm not really. It's more like a D&D campaign. I'm just going where the wind blows with it. It's a lot easier to write, but it's also something that I don't feel like needs to knock things out of the park. But at the same time, it's something that I can, be in control of, and I can decide, okay, if I want to end it in 3 books or 5, that's up to me. I'm in control of it. I don't have anyone telling me, oh, well, we're going to give you an option for 2, or maybe look at 2, 3, and 4, and then I'll have to like adjust the story accordingly. I'm like, no, I don't have to do that. I can go as much or as little as I want. And I'm not as concerned with as much the immediate sales, because I think that as well with indie books, you can keep promoting a book long after it's come out, but it's a lot harder in trad as well to do that because you get the
Right.
initial, and so you get a lot of bookstores and people seeing your work. But and the best way to promote a trad book, I think, is to release another one. And I guess the same is also the case in indie, but you can also run sales and promotion circuits, and that is dependent totally on you. Like sometimes I'll go to my Amazon page, like, oh, my trad books are on sale, but no one told me. Well, okay, I'll tweet about it now, post about it now. But with
Right.
self publishing, I can just decide, you know what, I'm just going to give the book away for free this weekend, and I've given away like 500 copies. Who, if they're actually going to read that, I don't know, but it is certainly in 500
It's something you
more
can
devices.
do though.
Yeah, something you can do. You
Yeah.
have that ability, and I think most important is, that you have that control and you don't have to necessarily worry about all those other factors that you do with trad. So I think that's the difference. Like, the
Mhm.
pressure is off with the self-public, with the books I'm going to go indie with, especially as it's not really a brand or a voice that I would want to be known for. I think
Okay.
I would never want this to be my debut novel, because it's very, very different to Stormblood and what I'm known for. So I think people would be extremely surprised. I'm not even sure if I'll put it under the same name because it's that different.
Okay.
But I think that having those options is good, and having that pressure off is also good.
Yeah, for sure. So now, are you planning on marketing this self-published series, and if so, how is your approach to marketing it different than how you currently market your traditional publishing series from your end of things?
Well, I haven't finished it yet, so I'm not. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. Who knows? I might just send it to my agent on a whim, and he sends it to an editor, and the editor's like, "My God, this is better than the Bible." Clear the shelves. And I'm like, that. I mean, that's never going to happen. Let's make that clear. That ain't going to happen. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with it. I'm just doing it as they go. But I don't think it would be too different. I don't think. I mean, obviously, I have a lot of avenues close to me, because I'm writing, I'm doing these blog posts, for example, like on John Scalzi's blog and Chuck Wenning's blog, and they state, you're doing a guest post, like it's limited to self-published books. I even tried to get I've done a blog post for John Scalzi before, and I tried to get my short story collection. I tried to get a blog post for that done, and I wasn't able to get that done, even though I tried published already. So there are
Hmm.
avenues
Wow.
that definitely used to me, and so things would look different, but it wouldn't look
Yeah.
completely different either. Although, look, I'd have to take a closer look when I actually reach that point.
Yeah. Okay. No, good to know. Good to know. Before I guess a couple last questions, I guess, before we wrap up here. But I do want to give you a chance to talk about your series, your Stormblood series, and your upcoming book, Wolfskin. Can you tell our listeners, I guess, a little bit about it, and yeah, give us the pitch for it, and let us know what to expect.
Sure. So I'm the author of the Common Saga. So the books comprised of that are Stormblood, Blind Space, and Wolfskin. Wolfskin's coming out later this month in March 2026. Other books are basically space opera or space punk, or a gothic space opera, I guess you could call them as well. They're basically about the DNA of an extinct alien race. It gets used as a drug that makes people get high on adrenaline and violence. Main character goes to war to fight this intergalactic Star Wars-esque empire, comes back with this drug in him, full of PTSD, full of scars, both mental and physical, and then finds out that his former squad mates are being murdered, and his estranged younger brother is the prime suspect. And so basically is torn between his actual flesh and blood, his family, and the family that he found and forged and used to get through hell, the hell that is war. And so he's going to have to betray one to do right by the other. And so the more he investigates, the closer to the truth he gets, the more addicted to the drug he becomes. It isn't about the who did it. It's about why did it happen? Can I save this person who means more to me than anyone else in the world? Or can I save him even potentially from himself? Is there anything left between us? It's between siblings at the end of the day. And their relationship grows and expands and changes with each novel. And by the third book, it is basically a big intergalactic war that's going on. That's probably pretty obvious from the cover, which has a big gothic cathedral speech on. I would describe it basically as the love child of Mass Effect and Red Rising and Altered Carbon, which are all things that I love and I just mash
Very
together.
cool.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome. So Wolfskin is coming out the end of this month, March,
March, yeah.
as we're speaking in mid-March here. So yeah, out soon. People can check that out anywhere. And I guess just to kind of close us off, can you, I guess, give listeners just a bit of a soundbite as far as, if someone's listening, they're wanting to make a successful author career and they're thinking about hybrid publishing because they like what they're hearing about TradPub and they like the flexibility of self-published works and they have it, they can go in between. Can you just give authors, a little bit of advice as how to best make that work for them?
Sure. I think the best weapon in your arsenal is knowledge. Talk to authors who have done this, see what they've done, do your research, get a good insight into the benefits, the pros and cons of both from podcasts just like this one, and see what works and, ultimately decide what's best for you. Personally, I think your book, no matter if it's trad or indie, you want it to be the best book it can possibly be, regardless of how you go. So make that effort first before you decide where it goes. Once you have that gem that's been polished, I would suggest that, you do go to try and aim at trad. If you still feel it's something that you can do or that you want to do, I would say definitely aim at trad and see where you can go because you don't know where it can go. And if you get a rejection, it might be because of the quality of the work, or it might not be for a myriad of other reasons. It could be because an agent just signed a novel that was similar to yours, right? You don't know, but you won't know unless you try. And so I would say, keep your options open, explore those avenues and see ultimately what works for you. There's no one way through the forest. And so you have to do what works for you. But before anything else, just write a damn good book.
Perfect. That is the perfect note to end this on. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining me here today. Thank you for staying up as late as you are. And I'm glad I got up early to chat. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much. And good luck with the release in the coming weeks.
Thank you so much.